Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into some intense global and U.S. news. We're covering just 3 incredibly packed days, July 4th to 6th, 2025. And we're talking about, well, monumental policy shifts, high-stakes international diplomacy, devastating natural disasters.
And even some surprising cultural milestones. It's a lot, happening incredibly fast.
Exactly.
Our aim, as always, is to sift through all that noise. We want to pull out those essential takeaways, help you connect the dots you might have overlooked, and really give you the clearest possible view of this incredibly fast-moving period.
Okay, let's unpack this. So kicking things off in the U.S., the headline event, I think, was undoubtedly the big, beautiful tax and spending bill. President Trump signed this sweeping legislative package into law on July 4th.
Yeah, and this wasn't just a minor tweak, it's a mix, right? Permanently extended 2017 tax cuts, a big boost to defense spending, more money for border security.
But also cuts, significant ones.
Right. It eliminated taxes on tips and overtime pay, which sounds popular, but then it slashed Medicaid funding, cut food benefits, and importantly, rolled back clean energy incentives.
So it's really hitting multiple fronts at once.
Absolutely. And what's truly striking here is how this isn't just about, fiscal policy for the year. This measure feels like a strategic legislative maneuver. It's designed to cement specific economic and social priorities for potentially decades.
Making it harder to undo later.
Exactly. Incredibly difficult for future administrations to reverse course without, massive political upheaval. It's about locking in those campaign promises. And the legislative process itself was quite a battle, fierce partisan debate.
I remember seeing clips. Democrats really pushed back.
Oh, yeah. Record-breaking speeches, procedural maneuvers, everything they could throw at it.
And the timeline for this was super tight. Trump celebrated his passage at a White House picnic, really pushing for it.
He did. And Speaker Johnson used that deadline pressure to whip the holdout Republicans into line. It passed the House on July 3rd, narrowly too.
What was the vote?
218 to 214, very close.
Wow.
Then straight to the president for signing on the 4th. The Senate vote actually needed Vice President J.D. Vance to break a tie.
So razor-thin margins all around.
Pretty much. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Republicans hailed it as this, patriotic Independence Day achievement. They see it stimulating short-term economic growth, especially in defense.
But the other side?
The Democrats slammed it, called it regressive, arguing it disproportionately favors the wealthy. They warned it'll inevitably increase hardship for low-income Americans, and also signaled a retreat from critical climate commitments.
It's interesting, even Elon Musk jumped in, criticizing it for fiscal irresponsibility.
Right, and analysts are definitely sounding alarms about the long-term sustainability. The prediction is it adds about $3 trillion to the national debt.
$3 trillion, that's significant.
It is. Public opinion is clearly split. Nationwide protests erupted almost immediately, and this bill is absolutely expected to be a major fault line in future political battles, definitely shaping the 2026 midterms.
Okay, so that's the legislative branch.
Yeah.
What about the judiciary?
Well, this brings up an important question about the balance of power, especially when we look at the Supreme Court. The court wrapped up its term, also on July 4th, with some landmark decisions. They significantly expanded presidential power, particularly executive authority over administrative agencies.
Okay, break that down. What does that mean in practice?
So essentially, it's a fundamental reweighting of constitutional interpretation. It grants the president much greater discretion in administration, applying principles of deference to presidential control over regulations enforcement policy.
So less power for the agencies themselves, more centralized control.
Precisely.
What does that mean for accountability then? Does it make it harder for Congress or, the public to push back if the executive has this much expanded power?
That's the core concern, and it's a crucial insight, yeah. Conservatives cheered this, saw it as correcting, quote, administrative overreach. But liberals are sounding a stark warning about the erosion of checks and balances. Legal scholars are deeply concerned it could fundamentally alter the federal regulatory framework. It could embolden future presidents, giving them significantly more unilateral control over everything from environmental rules to consumer protection, potentially bypassing a gridlocked Congress.
So Congress and interest groups are probably already planning responses.
Oh, absolutely. They're gearing up legislative countermeasures as we speak.
And speaking of judicial decisions impacting policy, there was that Texas immigration law ruling, also on July 4th.
That's right. A divided federal appeals court stepped in to block enforcement of a Texas law. This was the law that would have allowed state authorities to arrest and prosecute individuals suspected of illegal border crossings.
And the court said,
The ruling stated clearly that the Texas law conflicted with federal immigration authority. Basically, immigration is federal jurisdiction.
how'd that go down?
Well, immigrant advocates celebrated it as a crucial victory. They argued the law would inevitably lead to racial profiling and undermine due process.
But Texas officials probably weren't happy.
Not at all. They vowed to appeal immediately, setting the stage for a potential Supreme Court battle over this.
So this has huge national implications, really. The balance of power between states and the federal government on immigration.
Exactly. All happening amidst these broader ongoing debates on border security and asylum policy. It's a real flashpoint.
Okay, so while all this was happening in the halls of power, the actual landscape, I mean, the physical world, was facing its own immense challenges, these natural disasters, starting with Central Texas.
Yeah, catastrophic flash flooding swept through the Central Texas Hill Country between July 4th and 6th. It was worsened by remnants of Tropical Storm Barry.
How bad was it?
We saw an intense mesoscale convective weather system, basically, a very localized but incredibly powerful cluster of thunderstorms. It dropped up to 20 inches of rain in isolated bursts, areas like Kerr County along the Guadalupe River.
40 inches?
In some spots, yeah. Rivers swelled by as much as 29 feet in mere hours.
Unbelievable.
6 flash flood emergencies were issued. It was terrifyingly fast.
And the human cost. I saw some reports. It's just heartbreaking.
It really is. Local officials reported at least 82 fatalities, and dozens are still missing, including, tragically, 27 girls from Camp Mystic.
Oh, my God.
Kerr County alone saw over 68 deaths, many still unidentified. Rescue teams were just battling incredibly hazardous conditions.
What's the response been like?
Reactions have spanned from, statewide mourning to urgent mobilization of federal aid. Governor Abbott pledged a relentless response. FEMA was activated. President Trump also signaled plans to visit.
Makes you think about preparedness.
Absolutely. And what these widespread disasters, from the Texas floods to the European wildfires we'll get to, what they truly expose isn't just a climate trend, it's a global stress test. They're revealing that our current disaster response infrastructure, even in developed nations, is increasingly overwhelmed.
So we need to rethink things fundamentally.
I think so. The core insight here is we're moving beyond simple recovery towards a critical need for resilience-first planning. It forces us to rethink how we build, where we build, how we coordinate international aid. It's brought significant emergency preparedness shortfalls to light.
And reignited those debates over climate resilience.
Definitely.
And tragically, it wasn't just Central Texas. You mentioned Europe.
Yeah, across southern Europe, a record-breaking early summer heat wave ignited its own widespread crisis. Wildfires across multiple countries in early July.
Where exactly?
Spain, Turkey, Greece, Germany, France, even Syria. Thousands evacuated, over 57,000 in Turkey alone. At least 6 confirmed fatalities.
That's huge displacement.
It is. In Turkey's Izmir region, blazes destroyed homes, forced airport suspensions, fires in Greece's islands, Germany's Saxony and Thuringia. They just overwhelmed firefighting units. They needed cross-border support.
Syria, too.
Syrian border regions near Latakia also saw evacuations.
So authorities mobilized aircraft, shelters. But I heard experts describing these fires differently.
Yes, 6th-generation events. That's the term. What they mean is these aren't typical wildfires anymore. They're behaving in new, horrifying ways, unpredictable, incredibly fast-moving, and so deadly because they defy traditional firefighting strategies.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. And the long-term implications are vast. Economic fallout for tourism, agriculture, plus urgent calls for much greater investment in prevention and resilient infrastructure.
And that global stress test, as you called it, extends back to the U.S. West Coast.
It does. Early July, a wildfire in Northern California rapidly expanded. By July 6th, it was the largest in the state so far this year.
What's fueling it?
With the usual suspects, unfortunately. Dry conditions, strong winds, it's threatening communities, wildlife habitats, critical infrastructure.
So firefighters are battling it constantly.
Around the clock. Aerial support, mutual aid from other areas, evacuation orders are out, air quality warnings, the whole drill. And its rapid growth has just intensified all those debates about forest management, climate adaptation, resource allocation.
More calls for prevention and resilience measures.
Exactly. It just underscores the ongoing vulnerability of Western states to these climate-driven hazards.
As if that weren't enough, another storm.
Right. These intense regional fires are just one piece of this larger climate vulnerability. Now it's threatening the U.S. East Coast, too. By July 6th, Tropical Storm Chantal was expected to make landfall in the Carolinas.
Bringing what? Heavy rain, strong winds.
Yep, and the risk of flash flooding. Emergency officials there issued evacuation orders for low-lying areas.
And this is happening while Texas is still reeling.
Precisely. Its arrival coincided with the ongoing recovery efforts in Texas, stretching national disaster response resources incredibly thin.
So another hit to infrastructure discussions.
Definitely. Renewed critical discussions about coastal resilience, the urgent need for updated infrastructure to withstand increasingly extreme weather. It's becoming unavoidable.
Okay, so as the planet's wrestling with these intense weather events, the global economic and diplomatic stage was seeing its own kind of storms brewing. Let's talk trade. Treasury Secretary Bessent was very active.
Front and center, yeah. Facing a July 9th deadline for suspended tariffs, he announced an intent to warn about 100 nations. Basically, tariffs are coming back unless new trade agreements are finalized. The new implementation date is August 1st.
Has there been any progress?
Bessent cited progress with the UK and Vietnam, mentioned a temporary truce with China. He stressed the goal is to cover 18 key partners, the ones that account for 95% of the U.S. trade deficit.
And he also weighed in on interest rates.
He did push back against the idea that the Fed was solely responsible for the escalating pressure there. Separately, White House economic advisors signaled the U.S. was close to announcing several major trade deals in the coming days.
Covering what areas?
Technology, agriculture, manufacturing. Designed to boost exports, protect intellectual property, address those trade imbalances.
How did the markets take all this?
With unease, naturally. EU negotiators really ramped up efforts to lock in terms by that July 9th deadline. Industry groups started worrying about supply chain disruptions again.
So if it's unresolved?
Tariffs could definitely disrupt global trade, raise consumer prices. Supporters argue the pressure might unlock better terms for the U.S.
But the critics?
Skeptics say it risks a new front in global trade wars. Business leaders, economists are watching very closely. Critics caution protectionist measures could backfire. Supporters argue, well, assertive trade policy is necessary right now. It's a high-stakes gamble.
Okay, shifting gears to conflict zones. Israel and Yemen.
Yeah, on July 6th, the Israeli Defense Forces launched multiple airstrikes. They targeted Houthi-controlled positions in Yemen, including strategic ports and that captured vessel, the Galaxy Leader.
And this is part of a broader strategy.
It seems so. Part of Israel's campaign aimed at disrupting Houthi support for Hamas and other Iran-linked factions. Defense Minister Gallant confirmed the intensity of these operations.
What's the regional ripple effect there? That seems potentially dangerous.
It is. The reaction was mixed. Riyadh-backed Gulf states signaled support, emphasizing a secure Red Sea trade corridor. Iran, predictably, condemned it as an escalation.
And international observers
warned of spillover effects. UN officials urged restraint to avert a widening conflict that could really hamper maritime commerce and regional security. It highlights the delicate balance, or maybe imbalance, of power there right now.
But in a potentially more hopeful turn, also on July 6th, there was news about Hamas and a ceasefire proposal.
That's right. Hamas reportedly submitted a positive response to a new ceasefire proposal for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That immediately raised hopes for a potential breakthrough, even if cautious hopes.
Who drafted this proposal?
Crafted with input from Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, it apparently addresses key demands from both sides: prisoner exchanges, humanitarian access.
And Israel responded.
Israeli negotiators traveled to Doha, which signals cautious optimism at least.
How is this received more broadly?
Welcomed by the UN and regional powers. But skepticism remains high about the durability of any agreement, given how many past ceasefires have collapsed.
Still, a sustained truce would be huge.
Oh, absolutely. Could significantly ease humanitarian suffering in Gaza, reduce regional tensions, but the underlying issues, sovereignty, security, mutual recognition, they remain deeply unresolved.
Okay, another big diplomatic shift. UK and Syria.
Yes, quite a surprise for many. On July 5th, the UK and Syria formally re-established diplomatic ties after 14 years. This followed UK Foreign Secretary Lamy's visit.
And this happened while Syria was dealing with wildfires.
Exactly. Amid Syria's own management of those forest fires near Latakia we mentioned earlier, which complicated the humanitarian picture. The Syrian government announced evacuees from Kas al-Maf, and UK support actually helped deliver aid planes and firefighting vehicles to the affected zones.
So a mix of diplomacy and disaster relief. What's the thinking behind restoring ties now?
Supporters argue diplomacy allows the UK to influence reconstruction efforts, maybe gain some leverage, but critics are very worried the move legitimizes the Assad regime. Human rights groups are demanding accountability for war-era abuses before any normalization.
It's a complex situation.
Extremely. This combined climate disaster and diplomatic outreach really highlights Syria's precarious trajectory. Balancing reconstruction needs with all these unresolved political and humanitarian tensions.
And moving over to the tech world and international blocks.
Yeah.
BRICS and AI.
Right. During a summit in early July, the BRICS leaders, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the newer members issued a joint statement. They demanded stronger data protections against unauthorized AI use.
What are their specific concerns?
The declaration highlights deep concerns about surveillance, intellectual property theft, and the potential misuse of AI in both civilian and military contexts. The bloc urged the United Nations to convene talks on a global AI regulatory framework.
How is this being interpreted?
Widely seen as a direct challenge to U.S. and European leadership in technology policy, experts say it could accelerate the fragmentation of the global digital landscape. You might see rival standards and regulatory regimes emerging. It's a very interesting development in the race for AI governance.
Okay, so beyond the major geopolitical maneuvers and climate emergencies, these 3 days also delivered some, well, truly unexpected and uniquely human stories, especially across Asia.
Yeah, some really stood out. For instance, on July 4th, a North Korean civilian successfully defected across the DMZ.
The demilitarized zone. That's incredibly rare, isn't it? Especially now.
Extremely rare, yeah. It's heavily fortified, almost impenetrable usually, and unusual since some legislative reforms back in 2024 seemed to tighten things further.
And South Korea confirmed it.
Their Ministry of Defense confirmed the defection, stated the individual is safe in protective custody, and this development comes right after South Korea's National Assembly amended its own martial law rules in early July.
The ones forbidding military interference in parliament.
Exactly. So you have this internal reform happening in the South, and then this dramatic event at the border. Human rights advocates praised the defectors' safe arrival, naturally, noted it underscores the civilian suffering under repressive conditions in the North.
And North Korea's reaction.
Predictable. Condemned it as a provocation, threatened retaliation. Analysts say it just highlights the persistent tensions along the DMZ, raises questions about future defectors, regional stability.
And you mentioned South Korea strengthening its martial law oversight. That happened July 3rd.
Correct. The National Assembly made a pivotal move. They explicitly barred security forces from blocking lawmakers or entering the assembly building without the speaker's permission.
That seems like a big deal, stemming from that crisis last year.
Huge deal. Directly related to the crisis involving military overreach, it's seen as a major step towards reinforcing democratic resilience.
Did it pass easily?
Overwhelmingly, 173-3. And it coincided with the confirmation of Kim Min-suk as the new prime minister. Observers praised the reforms as pivotal for democratic resilience, aiming for public trust, enhanced civilian oversight.
Any concerns?
A few worries that maybe bureaucratic red tape could delay emergency response in a real crisis, but generally viewed as bolstering South Korea's democracy, maybe even serving as a regional governance model.
Shifting gears now, I was particularly struck by some of the more unique stories emerging from these 3 days, especially from the cultural realm. Let's talk cultural comebacks and farewells. Oasis.
Yeah. The legendary British rock band Oasis launched their highly anticipated reunion tour in Cardiff on July 4th, their first live performance together in 16 years.
Wow. 16 years, and it's tapping into that 90s nostalgia.
Big time. There's renewed interest in 90s Britpop. It generated immense excitement among fans, brought a real sense of optimism to the live music sector, which has had a tough few years.
How was the show received?
Critics and fans praise the sound quality, the nostalgic set list. Some question the chemistry between the Gallagher brothers, but overall positive. Industry analysts see it as a strategic boost to declining concert revenues. Proves classic acts can still drive big-ticket sales.
And then almost the opposite story. Black Sabbath.
Right. On the other end of the spectrum, July 5th, Ozzy Osbourne joined Black Sabbath for what they billed as their absolute final live show, called it Back to the Beginning, held at Villa Park in Birmingham, their hometown.
A symbolic closure for a band that basically invented heavy metal.
Exactly. Drew incredibly emotional fans, massive media attention. Music critics praised the night, celebrating decades of influence. But it also, underscored ongoing concerns about artist health and well-being, especially with Ozzy's health issues.
What about the economic impact?
Huge crowds, boosted local hospitality significantly. Culturally, it revalidated the lasting imprint of 1970s rock-energized music heritage conversations.
So you have Oasis coming back after 16 years and Black Sabbath saying a final farewell.
It feels like a real moment, doesn't it? Two ends of the rock spectrum reflecting on their legacies. Makes you pause and think about the staying power of music.
It really does. And speaking of spectacle, Macy's fireworks in New York.
Oh yeah, the 49th annual show on July 4th, they went big this year. An unprecedented 80,000 shells.
80,000. That's way more than usual, isn't it?
Yep, 20,000 more than last year, drew massive crowds, really leaned into the patriotism theme.
Visually stunning, I'm sure, but any environmental concerns?
Definitely raised. Environmental advocates voiced concerns over pollution from that many fireworks. Organizers have pledged future carbon footprint studies and greener solutions, but it's a valid point.
And there was a lot of celebrity presence around the 4th, too.
Yeah, global attention turned to high-profile Independence Day events. You had Nicole Scherzinger and Ariana DeBose at Macy's, Beyoncé performing in Maryland, even surprise gigs over at Europe's Roskilde Festival. Seems like a surge in patriotic-themed performances and summer cultural festivities.
Drives local economies, I guess.
Economists noted the weekend drove spending, yeah. Though some critics cautioned that celebrity oversaturation risks overshadowing grassroots art. But, 80,000 shells, all this celebrity fanfare, it paints a picture of a nation eager to celebrate, but maybe also wrestling with some of the more serious issues we've been discussing.
Yeah, that contrast is stark. And finally, beyond the major headlines, there were some, well, otter stories, too.
Always a few of those. For instance, tragically, deadly fireworks explosions injured dozens across Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia during the July 4th weekend. Renewed calls for stricter safety regulations.
A sad reminder every year.
It is.
And speaking of American traditions, Joey Chestnut.
He's back! Joey Jaws Chestnut, banned last year over a contract dispute, reclaimed his Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest title on July 4th.
How many did he eat?
71 hot dogs in 10 minutes. Just incredible. Or maybe disgusting, depending on your view.
Right. And while he was eating hot dogs, Philadelphia had a trash problem.
A big one. Sanitation workers went on strike in early July. By July 6th, uncollected trash was piling up everywhere, raised public health concerns, reignited debates over labor rights and municipal budgets.
What else? Any government oversight stories?
A couple popped up. Reports on July 4th revealed Canada's vaccine injury program vastly underestimated the number of claims after they expanded vaccination eligibility. Led to delays, frustrations, sparked debate over vaccine safety and public trust.
Okay, and something about an F-16.
Yeah. On July 5th, an F-16 fighter jet had to intercept and escort a civilian plane that flew into restricted airspace near President Trump's golf course. Raised questions about airspace management and protection protocols.
Never dull.
And then there was another Supreme Court ruling allowing the Trump administration's efforts to deport 8 men back to South Sudan, despite major safety concerns there, sets a precedent for future cases involving deportations to dangerous areas.
Okay, wow.
So if we step back, just 3 days, right? We've seen a monumental policy shift in the U.S., impacting everything from social programs to the national debt. Significant judicial decisions altering executive power, ongoing battles over immigration. Globally, critical movement in trade negotiations, escalating conflicts in the Middle East, major diplomatic realignments like UK-Syria.
And all of this against that backdrop of severe climate-driven disasters.
Exactly. Floods in Texas, wildfires across Europe and California, stretching global resources incredibly thin. And amidst it all, these fascinating stories of cultural milestones like Oasis and Black Sabbath and unique human endeavors, even down to hot dog eating contests and tragic firework accidents.
It really shows how interconnected everything is.
Deeply interconnected. Climate impacts stretch disaster resources thin, which affects budgets, while policy decisions influence global markets, which impacts diplomacy, which circles back to affect human lives caught in conflicts or facing economic hardship. It's all linked.
And that's our mission here.
Yeah.
Trying to give you those essential nuggets of knowledge, help you move beyond just the headlines to, hopefully, some real understanding. So what does this all mean when you put it all together like that?
It's overwhelming, isn't it? Which leads me to a final thought, maybe for you, the listener, to ponder. Considering the sheer volume, the intensity, and the varied nature of all these significant global events packed into just 3 days, what do you think is the biggest challenge societies face in making sense of and actually responding to such a rapidly changing, complex world?